Okay, hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you guys about the language processing. Okay, so first let's start off this story with a very interesting story. There was a patient in France named Patient Tan. So you may be understanding it, like thinking why would he have such an odd name? Not that Tan is an odd name, but Patient Tan, you wouldn't call someone Patient Tan, right? Um, so what Patient Tan was doing was that he would listen to a whole fluent sentence. He'd understand the meaning of it, but the only word he could say was tan. So think about it this way, right? Like, yeah, I my favorite color is brown. I really like the color brown because it reminds me of trees and I really like the earthy nature tones of brown. What about you? Do you like the color brown? And Tan would reply, tan. And then he'd be like, oh, what's your favorite type of plant? Tan, right? And it wasn't that he was purposefully doing this. The only word he could bring himself to say was tan. So why would something like this happen? So this physician, Pierre, sorry, I did not realize that. Dr. Pierre Paul Broca was doctor who worked with patient Tan towards his end of the years and then performed an autopsy, which is basically when a person dies, you look at all their internal organs, you look at everything to see what the possible cause of death could have been and what were the abnormalities of that person, right? So in patient Tan, what Broca saw was that there was a region in his brain. Here, let's try to draw this from the lateral view again. Um, uh, this region had a huge lesion in it. So remember how in the previous video we defined lesion as damage? So a lesion could be like an abrasion, like literally tissue damage of any sort. Um, So what happened as a result of this is that Broca's area, as we'll see later on, is the area associated with speech production, right? So it's in the left frontal lobe. So this is your left side view, and it's in the frontal lobe. Um, it's for speech production. It produces the speech, right? So that part was damaged. So as you can imagine, because the area that produces the speech was damaged, the only word he literally could say was tan, right? It's pretty it's a really sad disorder, but if you think about it, it's also a pretty cool disorder, right? Disorders like this help us learn a lot more about the brain. So let's learn more about it, right? So disorders that are associated with language are called aphasias, right? Aphasia, I believe, is the Latin root for communication. Aphasia means the inability to communicate, right? So language disorders, they're associated with language disorders. So for me, actually, this is one of my favorite chapters in brain facts because of these disorders. Not that I would wish that anybody would have these disorders, but what I'm saying is that these disorders are such rare and unique disorders that you have to really marvel at what the brain can and can't do. I mean, come on. You understand everything cohesively, but the only word you can say is tan. That's that just goes to show the capabilities of the brain, right? So sorry, that was my little ramble. Let's get back on track. Broca's area is the area associated with speech production, as we went over. And the reason why Broca's aphasias or the Broca's Yeah, it's called a non-fluent aphasia, right? So what do you mean by fluent? Fluent means the ability to speak in a constant state for, I think the time state is like a minute, without with minimal rambling or minimal pauses, or and the language should be fluent, like it should be cohesive, it should flow, right? So like I'm a fluent speaker because I'm able to speak without pauses. I speak in an understandable and clear manner, and I can do this for over a minute, right? Um, I think that's the medical definition of fluent. So in Broca's aphasia, all you can say is tan, right? What this patient could do was he could say tan, 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 right? So it's not understandable. It's not fluent, and he was speaking with pauses. So this was a non-fluent aphasia. He's not able to speak cohesively and fluently, right? So then you have Wernicke's area. Okay, so story time. There was a patient named SA who could speak so fluently, right? She would speak with utmost clarity, but what she said made no sense. Like she would say cat, dog, bird, Jefferson, vines, mirror, but she said it with such cohesiveness that it sounded like a full-blown sentence, but what she said made no sense. So what we say is that she basically, the reason she had this was a damage to her left temporal lobe, right? So this is her temporal lobe. She had a little bit of damage in Wernicke's area, which I believe is around this location. She had a lesion, right? She also had a lesion here. Um, and the reason this was so bad, right, is like she wasn't able to cohesively put a sentence together. So so she had what's known as a fluent aphasia, right? Like you can speak, but what you say makes no sense. Then there's something known as pure word deafness. This is by far the most fascinating disorder to me after prosopagnosia. Um, and prosopagnosia is face blindness, right? So pure word deafness is where you can hear everything that they're saying. You can hear sounds, you can hear music, you can hear words, but your brain isn't able to pinpoint that you're saying a word, right? So they can hear that I'm saying something. They can hear that I'm saying it, but they can't comprehend it because they literally cannot identify that I'm saying words. But they can identify music. Like if I were to hum a tune, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I know what that is. I know that that's Star Wars, right?" But they wouldn't be able to understand that I'm telling them something. They'd be able to hear that I'm saying each of the words. Remember, they're not deaf, but they're not able to hear my words. They can hear it, but they're not able to identify that what I'm saying is words. And the reason this happens is because of your damage to both temporal lobes, right? On both sides. So this is really important. Pure word deafness trips up a lot of people, right? So in the next video, I'm gonna show you guys an example of Broca's, Wernicke's, and pure word deafness, right? Broca's and Wernicke's aphasia, and pure word deafness. Oh, a really important thing that I think I might have forgotten to mention is that these areas that I've highlighted in blue and green are associated with um are literally called Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Okay, so these are legit locations where these patients have had damage and have resulted in these aphasias, right? And another thing I'd like to point out is that these case studies, point out a really extreme case of Broca's aphasia where all they can say is tan. All they can hear or say is like cat, dog, mirror, something, 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 right? But actually, in real life, these aphasias are a little bit more subtle, and it requires a really good understanding of how each of these sound for you to be able to put it together. So in the next video, I'll show you guys the telltale signs and I'll show you how to identify them because they're pretty hard to identify. All right, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.